Welcome, Wargamers, to the tumultuous campaigns of Ea, because today we are talking about Crucible of Wills Fanning the Fire, Part 2. Now, in my previous video, linked below, we introduced the stage and the actors for this particular drama. We have the invasive Sorcerer Kings coming in to settle the Illyrian plains, and the gladiatorial army of the city-states from Toria bearing down upon one another. Now, to explain if you've never seen a Parabellum campaign supplement, essentially it's a small box with two miniatures to represent these heroes that we've talked about, and then also a little campaign booklet. The pack itself has 4 missions in it to determine who is the rightful keeper of the Illyrian plains, and before each scenario is a short story section to keep you up with events. And then there's the mission for you and your opponent, and so on. It just keeps going. Now, this campaign is a little bit different from the previous one I covered, as there are moments where there are third parties in it. Like there's a game where there's a 100 Kingdoms army as well, just kind of splashed in. So if you have a group, this is a great way to include more folks. But for the purposes of this video, we're going to take the characters we met in the last one and go through each story beat, telling the tale of how these two armies collide, as well as some discussion that goes into the campaign system, the aftermath sequences, and that kind of stuff, regardless of who wins. It's fascinating stuff. I love these kinds of supplements for narrative gaming. Rather than having named characters kind of dominate the tabletop as we see in other games, these are reserved specifically for storytelling. Now, one thing I'd like to add up top here, if you are interested in anything Conquest, please consider using my discount code or affiliate link in the description down below to save yourself 10% store-wide on Parabellum stuff. Every time you do, Parabellum is kind enough to throw a tip in my tip jar that directly supports me, my wife, our cats, everything. It's life-changing stuff, and I appreciate every one of you who does it. But that's a lot of preamble. Let's jump right in here to the story. The first mission that we get is called Under the Sanguin Moon. And to kick it off, it puts Persenia in the driver's seat because she wants the initiative. We learn a bit about the state of things from a group of spies that Persenia was able to sneak in to Taj Kinjaha, basically the settlement of the Sorcerer Kings. Between her exterior scouts of the region, kind of mapping out what they think Yindak's doing, mixed with the information of the eyes and ears within the city, the synopsis of what Persenia knows goes something like this. The Sorcerer Kings are all mobilized for a fight, but instead of moving immediately, they took the army and paused near some kind of ritual site outside of Taj Kinjaha. The scout reports say that this has something to do with the rituals of the Sorcerer Kings. It seems like they're trying to bring something or call in some kind of reinforcement. Remember, city-states don't know the intricacies of their magic. We know that basically Yindak is trying to summon a powerful beast from the domain of fire to aid his armies. Now, from what it seems, Persenia is kind of putting this together, this ritual is going to take over a few days. And it really cannot be stopped once it's started, which it already has. However, if the ritual is crippled at any point, the monster coming through the ritual will be weakened. It's almost as if they don't correctly tether him to this reality. So Persenia is thinking all these things over and believes the best plan is to start off the offense with a surgical strike. She takes her brazen cohort, which we explained before is basically a full regiment of Maximus Decimus Meridius gladiators, and attacks at night. Now, like I said, they can't stop the ritual completely. Whatever monster they're trying to bring in will come in, but by taking out the mages performing it, when this monster comes through, it'll be so weak, hopefully, Persenia's forces will be able to mop it up. So in other words, this is essentially a denial mission. The city-state's goal is to simply deny the Sorcerer Kings a powerful asset in the war to come. Also, showing their hand that, hey, we're here, the army's right here kind of a thing. Skypiercer Yindak is not actually part of the ritual, he is the general, so him and his troops are standing guard to make sure nothing goes wrong, looking out for any kind of attack. Then the mission begins, and to match the fast assault of the narrative, this is actually a First Blood mission, the more skirmish level game of this. And the ritual is summoning the storied regiment Calathrazi the Soul Flayer to Ea. Now, of course, this is where the story segment ends and the mission begins, but one of the things I wanted to slip in here is that if the city-states player wins, right, and they stop or interrupt the ritual, the demonish monster Calithrasi comes through with a different profile. So if the Sorcerer Kings win here, they get the empowered version, and if the city-states win, then they have to use the lesser version, which is kind of cool. And that's the profile you use for the rest of the campaign, which is an outcome that I love. I love those kinds of like demonstrable effects of campaign stuff. Now the second mission we have here is a plan gone awry. Because that wasn't Persennia's main offensive, right? That was just kind of a jabbing to probe defenses and hopefully cripple an enemy that's getting stronger by the moment. It is not of war winning or losing consequence that this particular ritual goes off seamlessly, but the problem is that now they both know the other is out there. So Persennia returns to her army, which is now marching again towards Kaj Kinjaha, and Yindak goes back to his army and basically braces for the encounter with the city-states. We are set up for this to be the first time that these two armies clash head-on, and they're bearing down on one another quickly. Now, their place of meeting was a busy crossroads in the Illyrian plains, and what neither of these armies accounted for was a surprise attack from a third force. See, watching all this go off in the distance, right? Observing the city-states sneaking in and also the Sorcerer Kings building up their armaments, is a mercenary commander named Count Malvino. Remember I told you this whole area is littered with minor holds, minor kings, people just trying to run their own little independent fiefdoms. Well, Count Malvino leads one of the more, I guess, out there settlements within the 100 Kingdoms, who so far has done nothing but profit off of this conflict. Basically, Malvino has leased out sellswords and resources to both Toria and Taj Kinjaha, basically profiting off of being a neutral power that aids both. But it requires a deft hand, a lot of information, and so Count Malvino sends his son, Malvino II, to monitor both armies and report back. Basically, make sure the fire doesn't fan our way, and find a way to keep profiting off of both of these conflicts. But his son, Malvino II, has his own ideas. Why would I just sit back and watch? Right? We can dictate whatever outcome works best for us here. His idea is basically to attack both forces once they've weakened each other and take all the profits that he wants. Right? If the Sorcerer Kings are beat back, we get the land, and the land is full of iron ore, which is huge. And the biggest competitor for the iron ore trade in our region is Toria. If they fell, the price of our ore would skyrocket because all of a sudden demand outpaces supply. So while his orders are to watch, Malvino II charges in, eager to make a name for himself and his own burgeoning empire. So this is what I mentioned before, the three-way battle between the Sorcerer Kings, city-states, and the 100 Kingdoms. Regardless of the outcome, it's very clear both armies are caught very wrong-footed from this kind of experience. The three armies come together. No matter who wins that fight, they all have to retreat at some point to kind of rebuild their lines at the end of the day, get more resources, do whatever they need to do. Which is where we find the lead up to our third mission, Beyond the Miniporta. The only consistent outcome from the previous mission is that Malvino II gets his absolute tail kicked in and has done nothing to help his father except gain 2 more incredibly dangerous enemies. Which I love. He just did not bring enough to take on a city-state and Sorcerer King army, and so he retreated. But during that battle, as good generals are wont to do, both sides have been sending out scouting parties. Yindax has found a very significant place in this region. It's called Miniporta. It is a craggy and somewhat narrow pass that feeds the Illyrian plains into the lands directly controlled by Toria. In fact, the first major city on this road, this pass called Miniporta, is Babelia, where the city-state spearhead just launched from. So Yindak's logic is this, right? We can sit here and keep fighting in this open plains, and apparently draw the attention of all these little minor warlords near us who think that they can pick over the loser. Or we could go for the throat. What if we go to Babelia and level it? Because even if we don't need to, the city-state influence over this whole area will be significantly weakened. Because now those reinforcements have to come from even further away. So that's his plan. Sidestep Persennia, travel up the pass of Miniporta, right to the city, and take it. Now, on the flip side is Persenia, right, cussing up a storm because no one ever thought to fortify Miniporta, this direct route to her city of Babelia. And the reason is, nobody ever saw an army of this size and magnitude coming from this direction. There was nothing out here before. Why would we need that? Well, now you know why. Like I said, both generals have scats out, and from her information, Persenia is basically able to discover the plan. She, of course, knows the path. She just walked down it with her army, but now understands that Yindak is going to try to basically go for the throat, go straight for Babelia, and hit it hard. So she has limited time to plan something ahead. Her forces know the way better than the Sorcerer Kings. They know how narrow this pass really gets, how treacherous it can be for an army of these sizes. Remember, these are huge undertakings, so it takes time for troops to move from place to place. And she also knows that the city of Babelia has a Talos defender who would be very interested in an enemy army bearing down on them. And so her plan begins to take form. We're going to ambush the Sorcerer Kings in the pass of Miniporta and try to stop them from pouring into the lands firmly held by Toria. Remember, we're in kind of this abstract, lawless area. We're moving closer to a home base, so we need to start kind of having a stiffer response. Now keep in mind that Persenia is not trying to eradicate the Sorcerer Kings here. There's just too many for that. But this is intended to be a delaying action to give Babelia time to prepare its defenses, and essentially kind of take the wind or the initiative away from the Sorcerer Kings. Instead of them showing up as a surprise army at the gates of Babelia, they're going to be tired and bled before walking up to a fully prepared and fortified city. And that's where the mission is. This particular scenario is essentially the Sorcerer Kings trying to be denied and pushed back and held back by Persenia's forces to give the city time to prepare. For me personally, I love missions where you're just fighting in a narrow pass. There's just something very claustrophobic about it on the board, but it makes things very cool. So this is another mission where it's not that it doesn't have consequences, is that regardless of who wins or loses this battle, the Sorcerer Kings are on their way to Babelia. There's no question. There's no stopping them at this point. It's a hold at all costs type thing, which I love for story tension. It doesn't feel like, oh, we beat the Sorcerer Kings and now there's no reason for them to go to the next city. No. This is an unstoppable thing, but we can bleed them dry. Regardless of who wins that encounter, the Sorcerer King's army will eventually roll up to the city gates, and we have our final scenario, the battle for Babelia. Now, just to kind of put this in context, a few details from our episode yesterday, or the last one. Babelia is the largest city-state in the area, but it's founded as a pioneer center. Remember, Toria is the biggest city nearby that's fortified with walls and cannons and all this cool stuff. Babelia is a small town, relatively. It has a wildness about it. For example, only the innermost temple area and a few homes are walled in. The overwhelming amount of the city has expanded too fast with too few threats to justify encircling it. So most of it's just urban sprawl that's largely undefended. Even though it is the seat of power for the city-states over this eastern part of the Illyrian plains, it's not set up to take a punch. And Persenia knows that, because with most of the inhabitants being outside of the walls, a siege with the kind of magical warfare that she knows is coming, has been experiencing all these other previous missions, she knows that that's going to kill thousands, regardless of who wins. So, she rushes to get there and tries desperately to get defenses to be as good as they can be. Because if this falls, it is a long march back to Toria, again, the regional center. Now, of course, opposing Persenia is Skypiercer Yindak, who has had some difficult mental math to do. After all these previous battles we've talked about, it becomes apparent to him that outright leveling the city would require more power and soldiers than he has with him. But that's okay. His purpose is he doesn't have to wipe it off the map. The goal is just to cripple the city more than anything. Right? We'll go in, we'll tear it up. People can stay in squalor or run away as refugees. And then behind him, Yindak will seal up the pass of Miniporta, the one that we just talked about in the last mission, which would essentially knock the city-state's influence of the area out and seal it off from the Illyrian plains. This would give a way expanded, well-defined border for the Sorcerer Kings to flourish out of Taj Kinjaha with. So you can see their various goals. They both really want Miniporta, the place that they just came through, but for the purposes of sealing the other out of the region. Who gets to command that place is dependent on who wins in this battle. And to make it suitably epic, this one is like 3,000 to 4,000 points on each side. You get access to every storied regiment, including some ones that are just added for this particular mission. These are like minor heroes. Yindek has a sorcerer assistant. Persenia has the cavalry commander of Babelia on her side. This mission will take you hours to complete, and it is the final story to tell in this campaign. There are a lot of great things within this book, right? Consequences, both positive and negative, for winning and losing. Story segments for each side that I kind of passed over because I really want you to support Bellum and buy this for yourself. That said, like we mentioned before, there is a common thread to each side winning. Whoever wins the Battle of Babelia essentially lays claim to the region. Both sides want to build a wall at Miniporta to seal the other away, but if Babelia stands, then the city-states have enough influence closer to the region to dominate it. If the Sorcerer Kings win, then they push the city-states back and seal the land off for themselves. There are also personal consequences for each character, but I want you to have something to read when you buy this for yourself. And with those 4 scenarios, the campaign is complete. You and your opponent and your friends and your friend group have all decided what happens to the Illyrian plains. Now I want to kind of end this video like I end all of them by just kind of giving some why is this cool, but also just a sort of review of my ideas of the entire campaign sequence. For starters, I really liked the inclusion of a First Blood mission to start. And it does not matter any less than the other missions because that one determines which version of the Rakashara, or whatever it's called, Rashakar? I don't know, the big demon monster that the Sorcerer Kings get to use. It has weight and consequence behind it, but is also a great way to slow roll into a campaign. A First Blood game is much lighter, much more accessible for people, and I like that. What I didn't like was the second mission, okay? Not because it included another faction, although to be honest, if you're going to make a box that has 2 factions, I kind of expect all missions to be 2 players. But I did not like that their first encounter was interrupted. Like, this was supposed to be a showdown moment, and I just think it got interrupted too early by the 100 Kingdoms player. It didn't really add a whole lot, right? If you removed them and the 2 armies just clashed heroically and epically, and I don't know, we'll say Yindek got pulled away from the brink of death or whatever, but also at the same time both factions' scouts were operating, it wouldn't change the story at all. I just found myself being like, I don't want to learn about Malvino, I want to see these 2 go Super Saiyan on each other. That's a personal opinion. The mission itself I thought was very interesting though. Like if they just have a pack of 3-player missions, that's great. Like it fits right in there. I already mentioned before that for Scenario 3, I love the idea of tight underground passages and corridors and stuff like that. Going through the Valley of Miniporta was very akin to that. There's just something about that suspense in all historical movies where like an ambush is coming and everybody knows it, but you can't quite plan for it. And lastly, the last mission, Battle for Babelia, is just great because I love siege missions. Huge armies, 3,000 to 4,000 points. You got all your named regiments there. It's awesome. I really did enjoy this book. Like I said, my only complaint is the 100 Kingdoms third wheeling, the first time both armies meet. But not that they're there in general. I just don't think it should have been the first mission where the forces meet. But one thing that's hard to articulate is the mix of consequences. For example, for I believe all of these missions, if you lost the previous game, you get 250 extra points to build your list to kind of nudge you back in. If you win games, there are consequences like we mentioned before with the different versions of the Rashakar coming through. Artifacts and special rules change, so you really are incentivized to push for your best every single game, and also given kind of like a little bit of a carrot to nudge you along if you happen to be losing. Now, what I like about this story outline is that you could easily fit more First Blood games into it. If you and your buddy are playing this together and you want more, the story elements are already there for you to add them. For example, scout parties from both groups would reasonably encounter each other several times in this story. You could do skirmish things where all of a sudden the Sorcerer Kings are trying to infiltrate Babelia, kind of weaken its defenses ahead of time. it's great. It's great fodder for creating stories to tell compelling games. A simple and effective way to inject new models without huge book series and everything like that, and it adds characters, maps, and stories into an already rich world. I've been doing a few of these sets since Parabellum started releasing them hot and heavy. I have another one on my shelf to cover next, the Crucible of Wills, Ashes, and Faith, which I should be able to jump into pretty quick. I think I've done videos on both those factions. But let me know your thoughts. Again, this was a very simple one. There's just 4 scenarios that kind of lead into each other with some great storytelling in between. As far as what I would like to have happen, I mean, I have told you before, I am smitten with Presenia, so I kind of want her to, we'll say, lose the first 2 battles and win the second 2, because that gives her a bloody nose and the Sorcerer Kings enough screen time to be cool action heroes. But I did enjoy the fact that her rationale for the 3rd mission was to get there to defend people. Like, these aren't just super villains that just kind of twirl their mustache. They gave us a great idea of like why this matters. Babelia is an undefended, largely, city with urban sprawl. A lot of people were going to die no matter who wins or loses. So like, we need to address that. All in all, I thought it was an absolute fantastic supplement. If you're interested in either of these factions, they have fantastic unique sculpts for these models, and you can use them as just generic heroes in your other games. I would love to hear your ideal outcome. What would you like the results of each mission to be? I already gave mine, but leave yours down below in the comments and I will chat with you next time. Thank you so much for watching and listening, and I'll see you in my next Conquest video. Happy wargaming.